very warm welcome to you all. It's really, really great to see such a full house. To see, maybe especially it's comforting that so many people showed up the night after. Especially will know what I mean. So I presume you have recovered from last night's events, and for those of you who are not up to speed, so last night my childhood hero and our local soccer club, Ajax, it's called, they lost the semi-finals to Tottenham in the last minute, literally the last minute. And it's been horrible, and it's also a very good occasion to turn our attention to a very different topic, that of time travel. So tonight this event will be about time travel. My name is Claartje Rasterhoff. I work as an assistant professor at the University of Amsterdam, the area of urban history and digital methods. I act as a coordinator for a time machine project, the Amsterdam Time Machine, and I'll be moderating tonight's event. So time travel, for that you need time machines. You will know that. You remember from Suske and Wiske, or different part of the audience, perhaps Doctor Who, the space-time, spaceship TARDIS. And our time machines, I have to say, I have to warn you in advance perhaps, look a little bit different. They're just as cool, maybe cooler. That's for you to decide after this evening. We might call them complex information systems that process cultural heritage as big data of the past and leverage it for the future. So maybe you are none the wiser after that, but that will change during this evening. So tonight, researchers, partners in the Time Machine project, they will present this really exciting initiative, Time Machine Europe, some local time machine stuff, to show you what it is and why it is important. So we will do so in two parts. First, three core members from the start of the Time Machine organization, will present their own research, their activities, and enlighten you on different elements of a time machine. And in the second part of the evening, there will be a panel up here, a panel from public partners in the Time Machine organization, from the fields of environmental monitoring, digital cultural heritage, the preservation of endangered heritage, and finally the creative industries, to show you that this big data of the past really can be put to use in the present and hopefully in our futures as well. After the first three presentations, there will be a short window of time, 5 to 10 minutes max, for some questions, but after the panel discussion, there will be plenty of room for you to ask your questions and enter our discussion. So we look forward to that, and we see some, or I see some familiar faces, but also many unfamiliar faces, which is great. So we look forward to hearing your thoughts as well. So let me start by introducing the first speaker of tonight, Frédéric Kaplan. He holds the Digital Humanities Chair at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, EPFL. And he directs the Digital Humanities Lab there. So he conducts research projects combining archive digitization, information modeling, museographic design, and he is the director of the Venice Time Machine, an international project aiming to model the evolution and history of Venice over a course of 1,000 years, and also the initiator behind the even bigger, much bigger Time Machine Europe initiative, about which he can tell you so much more. So, Frédéric, if you could come up to the stage, we will hear more from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. So it's great to see you all there. I mean, we are here because actually we have a consortium meeting. I mean, I don't know which, I mean, it's maybe our 8th meeting or 10th meeting. I mean, this is now a long story. It's about 100 persons which are currently actively working at the University of Amsterdam to prepare the next steps of the project. The consortium in itself is more than 300 institutions So we're talking about something like 600, 700 people now. So it's becoming more and more embarrassing to actually present in the name of the consortium anything. And so I will just start by showing you a trailer, a pilot television program, which is the trailer for a television series which will be diffused on Arte, on television Suisse romande, and probably also progressively many other European television, which is about the Time Machine, which is a TV series, and that will give you a bit more idea about its breadth and diversity, and then I'll add a couple of elements so that you have a bit more technical understanding. So let me just switch to
the continent, Europe. In archives, beneath stones, in crumpled maps and winding streets, in pictures and paintings, in the depth of its green forests, history in Europe lies everywhere. How does one preserve and explore such a dense and fragmented past? How does one bring it into resonance with our contemporary world? In 2012, the Digital Humanities Lab at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne launched the Venice Time Machine and offered unique virtual immersion into history, thanks to the development of big data and artificial intelligence technology. Since then, dozens of European cities have taken similar steps. Each now contributes to the creation of a unified temporal exploration tool accessible to all. All these initiatives are now gathered within a consortium that groups together more than 250 European partners, universities, archives, research centres, and also private companies. Time Machine participants include historians, engineers, geographers, developers, entrepreneurs, researchers from a variety of backgrounds, as well as ordinary citizens, defenders of their heritage.
Chaque ville du réseau de la Time Machine pose des défis particuliers. Et donc chacune des équipes qui reconstruisent Paris, reconstruisent Budapest, reconstruisent Amsterdam ou Anvers, nous permettent de développer des compétences spécifiques.
I believe that the Time Machine is the future, how we will do digital humanities and humanities in the future. What we are striving after is really building things that are used to gain new insights.
First step, collect and aggregate data thanks to digital tools and automate everything in order to carry it out on a massive quasi-industrial scale.
So we have all those data, we have to store that properly and manage it properly, but we also have to make sense of the data. If you just present to the people thousands of terabytes of data, it's meaningless.
Today, science and technology can profoundly transform the cultural heritage with an impact on research, education, new applications, economy, and society at large.
Il y a cette idée d'être capable de fournir à l'utilisateur final des moyens complètement innovants de naviguer évidemment spatialement, même si c'est pas aussi évident que ça encore aujourd'hui, mais aussi de pouvoir naviguer temporellement.
The past thus becomes an invaluable resource to develop new tools of knowledge, an essential testing ground to train algorithms and consolidate progress in artificial intelligence. The Time Machine will also provide Europe with a unique ability to preserve endangered heritage.
Il doit y avoir une prise de conscience sur le patrimoine qui doit au moins être comparable avec ce qui est en train de se passer sur la chute de la biodiversité animale. Quand un site disparaît, ce sont des pans entiers de connaissances que nous ne pourrons plus jamais utiliser pour comprendre le présent et anticiper le futur.
Preserving the past in order to withstand the test of time, but also to cope with the worrisome trends in living conditions on Earth and respond to the wayward ideology affecting our times.
Notre rôle, c'est vraiment construire et mettre à disposition cette base de données, cette encyclopédie, exactement dans le même esprit que les encyclopédistes de la période des Lumières qui voulaient compiler des connaissances. Ben nous, on cherche à compiler dans ce nouveau matériau qui est le matériau numérique cette richesse culturelle, cette richesse sédimentaire qui décrit notre passé.
The race for the digitization of our past will not only be run by representatives of our public and scientific institutions. There is still a risk of seeing our history privatized, which raises the question of our society's ability to tackle such an issue.
You can argue that Google can do that better than anyone else, right? They have the best algorithms around. And I still think that it's crucial for Europe to do that on our own terms. If you imagine that an algorithm will only crawl those aspects of our cultural heritage that it finds most relevant to its advertisers, you only get a very partial idea of what the truth is.
This is an issue of culture, identity, politics, economics and ecology. The Time Machine Consortium must convince European society to share in this project.
L'Europe est à un moment clé de son histoire et elle doit décider qu'est-ce qui est le plus important en termes d'investissement. Un des enjeux de Time Machine, c'est donner une possibilité d'ensemble négocier une histoire commune pour envisager et co-construire un futur.
You'll have about, I think it's 10 episodes, 10 additional episodes that are going to be issued. It's like when you watch one, you want to watch another. I mean, it goes in depth with all the different work of the different partners. It's the first part of this form of documenting of this adventure. I'm sure there are going to be others. Essentially, I mean, the thing which is interesting in that particular year, 2019, is that we are at a turning moment. I mean, 1 month ago, 24 countries actually signed a declaration, a joint declaration on the importance of building a pan-European platform for digitizing cultural heritage, and especially 3D cultural heritage. So this is something historical. I mean, it's not bounding, but it means that Europe will ask what they've been doing in that direction in 1 year, essentially. And that happened actually just 1 month after the launch of the Time Machine CSA project, which is the current version of the project, in which Europe has decided to award some money, I mean, to the Time Machine to actually finish its 10-year roadmaps and plan. I mean, it's blueprints for the future of specifically that form of platforms. And that conjunction of these two elements, I mean, the fact that there was this recognized need for Europe, the fact that European Commission is actively pushing Time Machine as being a solution for this, makes it a very interesting moment. Of course, it was 1 week after the declaration, we had the fire of Notre Dame, which had a form of enormous, I would say, reasoning globally in how fragile is essentially millennium heritage. And it was interesting because I remember we had a big discussion on when you see on the video, I mean, some threats about the cultural heritage, and we have these images about terrorism, about ISIS, destructions, but we insisted at the moment that it would be maybe interesting to have images of the Venice. This is the images of soap and fire. And that was kind of extremely bizarre because it's more or less the same images that were seen again 1 week after the declaration. So essentially what we have now is a consortium of a size which is unseen in the work of cultural heritage. I mean, we have we have about 7 national libraries, we have 19 state archives, we have companies, very big museums, research institutions, members of ministries. I mean, reaching such form of wide alliance is really something which was unseen of scale, in that scale. And so this is already a victory. I mean, having all these people sitting on the same tables, joining the same meeting and designing together the platform they actually want to have for the future of cultural heritage, not built by a single company, but building by the European partners, which are actually designing it based on their own value and objectives. This is now a project which is just growing and growing. I mean, this was the situation in October last year. I think we have to re-update that map for the Time Machine 2019 conference. Our objective is to reach about 2,000 signing institutions in the next 12 months, essentially, which would be a very complete and high coverage about these institutions. So essentially, what's the core of the project? It's about the elements you can actually extract on cultural heritage resources. So here I'm showing as an example, I mean, documents or elements like it, but it's the promise we had since the beginning is to show that you can do much more than just storing images and making them accessible. There is, in fact, big data of the past which are hidden in these documents, especially if you're capable of massively extracting the information which is inside, massively aligning that information and solving progressively the puzzle of their correspondence. Density is the element we wanted to show, and this is what we have been tried to show at least on the Venice cases, that if you actually go to the state archives where they were actually keeping very dense and very detailed information about a city like Venice, you are capable of reconstructing very precise model. In an abstract sense, is if you represent, I mean, the information mushroom as the amount of information you have in space and time, so a very large plateau of contemporary digital information, and less information the more you go down on the curve and back in the past. The goal of the time machine is to enlarge the mushroom and making it looking a bit more like a square. You do that by doing massive digitization, organizing massive digitization actually on scale, convincing countries to invest in this and to perform digitization work. But you also do this by adding a simulation layer, doing inferences, doing extrapolation, and doing that in a negotiable and computational way. So this is essentially, I mean, the inner working of the time machine. It's a way for processing very different types of document and archive, ranging from videos to document, and then progressively extract information which are constituting this core mushroom and this big data of the past, enlarging it through user intervention and through the advance of some machineries that are going to be progressively developed over the years. I mean, we're mentioning here the 4D simulation engine, universal representation engine, large-scale inference engine, and what do you do? How do you actually process billions of facts? This is potentially one of the biggest or ever knowledge system ever made, and we need, of course, to administrate this a couple of new technology to do this. This is considered the core, an open core, I mean, open documents, open knowledge in this aspect, which is then projected to different platforms, which are corresponding to different stakeholders, the media industry, the videos industry, the land use industries, the smart cities. I mean, showing that if you have indeed very dense information about the city, you can make better decisions about the future. You can have actually possibilities of predicting some elements of what is going to happen, or at least you have extremely well documented decisions which are taken. So this is what we're doing. How it will look like and how it's actually looking like now. Essentially, in the first phase, you will get a search engine. I mean, you will have a search engine, a bit like what you would expect from Google, except that it will be a Google from the past. This is already what you have on the Time Machine website, in the Diamond prototype. It's getting updated regularly to make some progress. You can search, but you can search not only, of course, in textual document, you can search in also documents which have handwritten recognition system on which you can click and get, for instance, in a case like that, we found a Tiepolo. This has been read by a machine, also the number. Here you click on the number of that particular cadastral information, you find where it was living in Venice. This has been automatically processed based on some human training, and we believe that progressively through generic process, there's ways through, of course, human curation to make these connections between these elements. It's also true for images. I mean, we have huge databases of images. They are not on the internet, and it's very important to say. I mean, most of our visual knowledge is still in phototech in different places in Europe and in other places in the world. bringing these elements online is bringing the dark matter of art history. I mean, it's about bringing a continent of information which has been very difficult to study, and for this, again, you need some form of artificial intelligence technique, which permits, for instance, to start from an initial query and look for a detail on that particular query. Here you have a Piazza and Marco image that was found by similarity with other images. I can actually look at the detail of these elements and find other example of a company which would actually look very similar to that particular item. And so this you can test on directly on the website. It will get bigger and broader in the coming days. You can actually find it. And of course, progressively, I mean, recreating the cities by taking ancient documents, cadastral and ancient maps, and progressively mapping your knowledge across. So it's a first step, but it's of course not exactly the final objective. I mean, they're going to be different platforms, but what we're heading to, and I want really you to imagine what is going to be that form of 4D world. I mean, that world where we will have enough information about different places in Europe to be capable of actually reconstructing full history at a certain level of density. This is, for instance, what we've been doing for Venice at urban level. This is here what we are doing, for instance, for Paris, based on the EGN data sets of aerial photographs. I mean, it's actually full environment of Paris, which are reconstruct just by comparing this type of information. You have that for any document, any places, as long as you have enough information, and this is constituting a full 4D world. It's very likely that in 5 years, 10 years, that's a big question, we'll have access to that form of mirror world where we have the possibility to grow not only in space but also in time. And there's of course a lot of change about this, but this will change probably a lot of things in the way we are actually processing information. So just to finish on this, and if you want a metaphor where we're going, I mean, maybe one way to look at time machine is to say that time machine may be ambition to become a form of operating system for that 4D world. I mean, organizing the way we will navigate in time and space. And this is not so different from Doctor Who to some extent. And so that's why, I mean, on the one we always say, you know, it's not like science fiction, but on the other hand, it could be a bit like science fiction. And when people say, but really what the time machine is what you expect it to be. I mean, it's going to be a time machine. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Now you kind of know what the time machine is, right? You don't know exactly how this is done, how we're getting all that information. So our next speaker, Andreas Maier, he's a computer scientist and a specialist in topics like pattern recognition, machine learning. And he heads the pattern recognition lab at the Friedrich-Alexander-Universität in Erlangen, Nuremberg, and he works on all kinds of topics from medical imaging, speech processing, computer vision, general machine learning, and for me, really mind-blowing, for me as a historian, a technology that I won't tell you anything about, but will let Andreas show you what it is himself. So Andreas, I welcome you up to the stage. Thank you.
So thank you very much for the introduction. So I get to show a tiny piece of the time machine, and I want to show a little bit of the inner workings, what we're doing here. So the topic that I'm presenting today is we have some technology where we want to try to read closed books, and yeah, let's see how that actually works. So imagine you have sometimes documents that are in a quite bad condition in archives. And you can see here examples that, you know, documents get destroyed all the time, and then it's either water or fire or other causes that may really harm documents, but also age may be a problem, so that when you open those documents, you do serious harm. So the question that we've been asking is, can we actually still get the information out of the document without having to open it? And I happen to work a bit in medical imaging, and in particular we work with X-rays and computed tomography. And it turns out that some of the historic inks, actually quite a few of them, are composed of metallic particles. In particular, iron gall ink is one of the first inks that we experimented with. And you can see that those they have much higher X-ray absorption than any of the pages that they're printed on. And today's scanners have actually pretty fine resolution, such that we are able to reconstruct multiple slices throughout the document, and we would be able to read them. So what did we do? This is a micro CT system where we placed a book inside. So the things that I'm presenting here today are actually a test specimen, and we wanted to experiment with different inks and test which inks are suited for such kind of processing. Then you place the document on the table, and you take essentially X-ray projections from all directions. And because X-rays attenuate along the line, you actually cover the entire information through the book. So you kind of take a shadow image, and from many of those shadow images, from many angles, you reconstruct the 3D volume. So what you then get is a 3D volume, but the problem is that, you know, when you try to look at the volume, you can't see a lot because, well, you can see some of the letters here, so there seems to be some contrast, but the pages are never perfectly flat. So when you try to do that, you end up with the problem that you still somehow have to track one page. And this is exactly what we did. So we started tracking the individual pages in the document, and we have actually sampled several slices through each page. So we are able to track the page, and in the next step we virtually flatten it. Then you know that some of the ink is inside of the page and so on. So we do a second step in which we then project onto a single slice. So we actually have several voxels in one page, so several volume elements in one page. But doing so then allows us to get one image per page. And I brought some examples here. So in the top row you see actually photographs of the same page and then different inks. And in the bottom row you see the extracted pages and the reconstructed contents on this page. So this is actually quite promising, and it's a very nice technique that we really can reconstruct the entire pages. And then we went ahead and said, okay, can we only use this on European documents or books, or how about scrolls? And we happen to have access also to, you could say, a kind of Asian book here. And this was a scroll, and you can see obviously that in East Asia there's also problems with heavily mutilated documents. So we actually also did some experiments with that. And what we did is we kind of mimicked the situation that we expect such a scroll to be discovered. So we placed it essentially in a plastic bag, added some earth and soil in there, and put that into the CT scanner. And this is what you get out of that. So you can see the bamboo strips, but somehow there's all kinds of things in the background, and you want to get rid of that. So how do we do that? So my colleague Daniel Stromer actually developed an algorithm to track the individual bamboo slips. Then you can localize the slips. And once you have that, then you can do a virtual cleaning of the volume. So you get rid of all the background material, then you only have the slips in here. And once you have tracked them, then you can also virtually unroll the document. And here you see on the right-hand side the reconstruction from the CT scan, and on the left-hand side you see a photograph of the same object before we heavily modified it, you could say. Okay, so this is about what I had to say. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that you enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you so much. Wow, this is amazing, right? Who could have ever dreamt it? We might have dreamt of a time machine, but doing this, and indeed, very promising if we see these results. Thank you very much, Andreas. For our third speaker of today, we will zoom in a little bit on the local level, because in this large European consortium, we have all kinds of national institutions, but also many local institutions and local initiatives that develop their own version of a local time machine. We already saw the Venice time machine, and now we will have a look at the Amsterdam time machine. Our next speaker is Julia Noordergraaf. She's a local, really. She's a professor of digital heritage at the Department of Media Studies here at the University of Amsterdam, where she is the director of the Amsterdam Center for Cultural Heritage and Identity, which is one of the university's research priority areas. And within this AGI, we call it, she leads the Digital Humanities Research Program Creative Amsterdam, also called CREATE, that studies the history of urban culture and creativity through digital methods. And this is, on the one hand, with the aim to enrich our historical research, our research practices, but also with the aim to leverage it for current practices, present-day cities, citizens like yourself. And this is becoming a larger part also of the practice of historians. And she will show you what the Amsterdam time machine is becoming, but also how it might be put to use. So, Julia, if I may invite you to the stage.
Thank you very much, Claartje. So I want to start also with our dream. So what is the dream we have for the Amsterdam time machine? It is, of course, inspired by the Venice time machine example. We have this lovely film that was made by the City Archives of Amsterdam of the growth of the city in the 17th century with the establishment of the Canal Ring and the Westerkerk, Wester Church, as you see here. So this idea that you can travel through space and time simultaneously in Amsterdam. But then not only seeing the city in this flyover mode, but also having this enriched with all the historical information that we have on the city. And so as Frédéric has shown, extracting this information from the digitized heritage objects, connecting it so that we can do analysis, and also connecting it to the places to which it belongs. So that you can actually go to one of the oldest parts of Amsterdam, the Warmoestraat, now the red light district, and visit the home of Dirk Barenszoon, who was a painter and also had a shop. And this is a reconstruction of one of our students who worked with my colleague Madelon Simons, art historian. And this student made, based on the few surviving documentation, made a reconstruction of this house. And here we see the shop of Barenszoon. So it really gives you an idea of how small this space must have been and how this business of selling paintings and art must have been conducted. So how are we actually realizing our dream? Well, it's not just us, it's really a big and still also growing consortium of partners from the field of research and around the red circle, so it's academic research institutions who collaborate with cultural heritage partners and with partners in the creative industries and with societal partners to jointly to join our efforts and make this dream a reality. So where are we currently? One step that we're doing, Amsterdam has a lot of digital heritage already. So our challenge is not so much in smart digitization, but in how do we extract all that rich information from these sources. Well, you see here a picture of what we call the Amsterdam Linked Data Cloud. So what we do is we collect all the data sets that are in a certain linked data format so that we can properly connect them to each other, and also, for instance, to the Wikidata, so all the data that you find under Wikipedia. And when I zoom in on one of them, Adamlink is all the data on Amsterdam in the Amsterdam libraries. So the public library, but also the university library and the libraries of the museums in the city, and so on. And what you can already do, this is all still in demo version, you can actually go to the AdamLink website and you can search your a street, any street. Well, of course, what did I immediately do? Search my own street. So I live at Reuzenkade in Amsterdam West, and here you see the street on the map. And to the right, you see all the images that exist in the archives in Amsterdam on this particular street. So they are all now tied neatly to this map of Amsterdam. And what I particularly like is I live in an apartment building that's quite recent, but it's built on the site of an old cinema theater, the Hallen Theater. So I see a picture of that old cinema. Well, I happen to do research on the history of cinema and cinema going. So it's exciting to live in at the site of an old cinema. And I reconstructed another cinema in this neighborhood. But I can imagine reconstructing my own Holland Theater and then being able to go inside and eventually watch Charlie Chaplin's Modern Time, which played there in 1936. Well, you can imagine how you can, what kind of experiences, how you can enrich your experience of your own neighborhood in this way. This is not just a gimmick for ordinary citizens, for anyone who's interested in history. It's also a tool for innovating historical scholarship. What I see in the Time Machine is really facilitating a new kind of research that I call scalable humanities research. We've always been very good at the infinitely small, to the bottom corner. Humanities scholars are very good at really reading one book very closely and analyzing its meaning and its form and style and so on. But we now also get the infinitely great. We get the big data of the past. And what Time Machine will allow us to do is to go to one particular place, such as the house of the Verwayen, but then zoom out and compare it to all the other painters that lived and worked in Amsterdam in the 16th century, transfer to all their customers, and so on. So what we in the end get to see is the infinitely complex. We can, by combining this data, really do a lot more complicated analyses of historical society than we ever could before. An example of such scalable humanities is this project we started in September on the cultural production and consumption in Amsterdam in the 17th century. On the one hand, we look at sites of production, so where did all the painters live, and look at affinity between them and how that's related to the locations where they lived and worked. But we also look at the side of consumption, and this is really exciting. I think that we have in all city archives, there are kilometers of archives describing what people owned. Because when someone died, for instance, they made up a list of all the items in the household, or when you had to make up your will, you would have to do that as well. So all the notary acts are now being digitized, and with this handwriting recognition, we can extract all that information and locate it actually to the 3D models that we create of the houses. So here it's not about the text, it's old Dutch, but what you can see really is what did people own in their households, and we can put that on a map and see what ordinary Amsterdammers bought and had in their apartments. So we really see a history from below. As Claartje said, it's not just about scholarship, it's also about society. So we collaborate with initiatives like this that try to bring young school children in contact with people who lived in the neighborhood of their schools during the Second World War. And Time Machine, you can imagine, can really enrich the preparation of such a meeting, that pupils can walk through the neighborhood in war years, etc. And we also want their stories and their experiences to be fed back into the Time Machine. So we want it to become a feedback loop where cultural heritage of the past is also enriched with the experience of present-day citizens. And of course, there are lots of urban development challenges, tourism management, that we can support by providing the long-term perspective on how the city evolved. As mentioned, we are inspired by the Venice Time Machine, but by now there are 15 local time machine initiatives, so there's much more exciting stuff to come. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Julia, for showing us the work in progress and the potential. We now have time for some questions from the audience. So I will take a microphone, walk around. You can raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question to one of the presenters we just heard. If you're more comfortable asking your question in Dutch, that's perfectly fine. We will translate. It's not a problem at all. So yeah, please raise your hands if you have questions for the presenters.
And you want to substage or what?
Yeah, if you could, if the presenters could come back on stage, that's a great idea. Could also have a seat over there. So, are there any questions? There must be. Yes. Hello.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. My name is Gustavo. You all used a lot of different examples of time travel through fiction, like Doctor Who and TARDIS, but with this background of data science and digital heritage and history, how you think these projects can use all of this knowledge provided by the science fiction to see new possibilities of uses to the time machine.
Who wants to go first?
Like how sci-fi can inspire you?
It's interesting the time machine as a mythical machine. So okay, go. If you look at time, I mean, if you look at mythical machines, okay, so the intelligent robots, for instance, or others like this. I mean, the time machine is one thing which has not been realized. I mean, and which is for a moment extremely, which was, I would say, the only ownership of astronomy. I mean, essentially the discussion on time machines were made on possibility of going back on time, going forward on time, and the theoretical possibilities which would then lead to an actual let's say to an actual speculation about the fact of doing it for reality, and then fiction was developing independently on the nature of time. There's a very good book, in fact, which is called The Time Machines, which is doing a full ontology about all the different fiction in respect to the development, especially in the 20th century, of the theory about time travel linked with progress with Einstein, etc. But it was a bit uncoupled, let's say, from any technological realization. In the meantime, something that was interesting that in popular culture, although it's been a kind of regular spot, I mean, there was an increase, this is to be controlled, but at least also in TV series, about time machine themes, in the sense that it was becoming pervading. And the idea that in a narration you have possibility of different time and possibility of people to travel, I mean, from Lost to many more also recent series. I mean, this has been becoming almost a normal thing that you have on a TV series. And so the idea of progressively getting the idea that time is a fourth dimension got in the popular culture in that respect, and that it's fine actually to do these elements. I don't want to do a whole course on that, but let's just see that it's a bit different from what was the situation in the 20th century, where time was really something which was a kind of engine for progress. I mean, you had the idea that things will change because of the sake of time, so it was an active agent. The idea of putting it in a four dimension, so as a coordinate of space and time, which was thought about before, but becoming in popular culture made it pervasive. So when a space became fully accessible with elements like Google Earth, and it became normal, you know, from one year to the next to be capable of zooming in any place of the Earth, which was impossible before. I mean, this is a huge transformation in our everyday life. Then the idea that there was a fourth dimension and it was natural to have another slider to go back in time was ready. It was probably not ready 100 years before or 50 years before, because time was different and because this naturalness of the fourth dimension. And so as it was ready conceptually and also in popular culture, there was just a question, why can we do it, can't we do it? And there was the, I would say, the shortcut of two things. First, I mean, realizing, of course, that there's super dense information, not necessarily in library, but in archives, I mean, which has had the responsibility of keeping everything to have cities surviving and working. I mean, this is, and discovering that it was actually normal that information was correct, because if it was not, the city was failing, you would not pay taxes. And a couple of bottlenecks that came from some AI techniques that were thought to not work for years, and that started to work. And that happened essentially 5 years ago. Where because of the amounts of big data, generally speaking, a lot of machine vision techniques which were making very small progress became possible. At the beginning of the project in 2012, 2014, 2016, when we were claiming that it was likely that we would be capable of reading unwritten document, we had a lot of people explaining very seriously why we would never be able to do it. Even if we say, but look, we make speech, we make a lot of things. Now, it starts to work, not with all writing styles, and so it's the question is, yeah, but there exists a writing style, and of course you have your doctor writing style, you can't read even yourself. But anyway, so to put the long story short, it's not exactly the same story than the robots, which had a much more, you know, continuous story about 17th, 16th century. It's an interesting thing to do a PhD thesis if you want to.
Great. It's time for another question. There's a couple of in the back. I'm not sure we'll be able to. I saw you first, so I will come to you if I can walk this way. You can also save your questions for the discussion in the end.
Hello. I was wondering, you talked a lot about feeding in digitized data, but do you also archive born digital data like the internet or Twitter? Digital art, digital born artworks.
Okay. Yeah, we should, but it's hard. And a lot of people are trying to do this. And as you know, I mean, things have been getting worse and worse over time. I mean, situation for safeguarding the internet, what it was in '97, when you could save a web pages and maybe save the hardware and maybe save your Mosaic browser to recreate the experience of what it was still possible. The more we went into the recent past, the more actually it became complex, because a web page is a real-time composite of many things coming from different places. The arrival of personalization makes that you see something which is different from what I see. The arrival of content which is produced on the fly to match more the way you actually experience the data destroyed the very notion of document, which is making the whole idea of safeguarding the internet a very hard thing. There's a lot of very exciting discussion about this, about how actually you make a good strategy to doing it, and there are people which are doing it. You know, the Internet Archive, the national libraries are doing it. It's definitely something we care about. It's definitely something which is about the hardest thing, which we are dealing with, and there's needs for developing extremely, I would say, aggressive technology to try to avoid the thing that we have really in 100 years or in 200 years, a very long black hole about what was the hell happening in these years. I mean, nobody knows. Okay, so it's now as it is. There's no solution to our knowledge apart from taking pictures of what you see on the screen and having a lot of different persons taking pictures simultaneously to understand how they see different things, despite the fact that they would ask the same question on their search engine. Julia.
I just want to add that in addition to needing technology for this, we also need to rethink what the object that we're safeguarding is. So if I'm thinking of the Eurovision, the song contest nowadays, you know, with social media around these kind of programs and also voting. So the program, what is the program? The program is also the social media stream around it, and how. So it's also a conceptual challenge of rethinking what it is as a society that we need to keep in order to remember the present.
And just to add another layer, I mean, you probably heard about the MySpace disaster a couple of weeks ago. 50 million songs that were erased away from a platform that people were not using so much, but has been used. It's 40 million artists. The question is, who is responsible for safeguarding and archiving the content of the platform, which are now global, supranational. If nobody is responsible, this data will be lost, for sure.
In conclusion, important question, not yet solved. One final question, maybe something also about these books that you can read without opening them. Anyone? You all got it? Yes? And then if I saw some hands over there, please keep your questions in mind for the final discussion or later.
Do you have any plans or start already working on preserving the intangible cultural heritage? Let's say dialects, for instance, the language dialects of Europe, or is it out of the whole concept?
So it's sure. I mean, intangible heritage, is protected by UNESCO. There are different ways of recording it. You can record the gestures, you can record the dances. There's, the way the pizzaiolo is safeguarding the pizza, which is on UNESCO Patrimony. And that is extremely important. It's actually the thing is one thing is safeguarding it from now, and like the signature of some resilience from the past. The thing which is interesting also is that people have been doing this in the past, especially in the case of dialects. There are some very interesting studies that were done throughout the 20th century. One, for instance, is the Atlas of the Mediterranean, which was actually taking a series of words which were common to most of about fishes, different type of fishes, used by most Mediterranean seaside countries, and managed to exactly encode the pronunciations of those across Europe and North Africa before globalization. And so these are also, from the time machine perspective, not just safeguarding, but also understanding what has happened before increase of exchange. You're always surprised how many smart studies were done in the past, and bringing them back is important. How do we present language change, and what is language? And that is a super exciting and difficult element, which is clearly in the scope. We are not completely ready yet, but apart from bringing back a good element from the past.
And I want to add one thing. In a project, a time machine project we did with the Academy of Arts and Sciences, Humanities Cluster, and with the Frisian Academy, is that we put language resources on the map of Amsterdam dialects. And you can actually query that data set and see in what neighborhoods certain dialects were spoken, and then you can click on things, and then you hear someone speaking that dialect actually. So that's going to be the future.
Thank you very much, all the three speakers, and you for your questions. We will now move on to the panel discussion. So we will have a change of scenery here on the stage. So let's first get everyone up, and then I'll invite the speakers in the panel discussions on the stage. Thank you. So for the second part, we will zoom in a little bit more on these applications beyond our academic walls by inviting partners from the industries, from public institutions, to talk about what they do, and of course also a little bit about what the time machine might mean for these practices that they have. So they have all prepared a few minutes statements for you and a brief video for you to watch. I will ask you, the panel members, Valerie, Harry, Bastien and Deborah, to all come up to the stage and have a seat at the table over here. So our panel is complete. I will introduce each panel member one by one and ask them to give their statements. I just want to check if we're okay for the tech. If we can, yes, start here. So first off, we have our colleague in the Time Machine organization, Valerie Gouet-Brunet. She is head of research at the Matis Lab, which is part of the French National Geographic Institute of, or maybe we could also call it the Mapping Agency. And this lab leads research activities in the fields of mathematics and computer science, applied to photogrammetry, computer vision, remote sensing, and she will talk about what they do over there and show you some visual proof of that. Valerie.
Sorry. Time Machine is talking about the big data of the past. And here I would like to focus on some special data, which are here. No, sorry. Here. The video. And so I would like to focus on some special data, which are called geodata. So the big geodata of the past. So for us, what is a geodata? A geodata is a data, particular information that you can attach to a spatial information. This spatial information can be precise information such as GPS localization, or less precise information such as, for example, in front of the butcher shop. Okay. This data, this kind of geodata, are very more and more important. They take values, and it's normal because what happens somewhere. And naturally, it can constitute a kind of common framework to link many different kind of informations. For example, if you consider the neighborhood here, probably you can find many pictures of this neighborhood, many textual social history about this neighborhood. You can also find probably some climate indicators about this neighborhood. And through this common spatial framework, we can link all this information over long time periods. So it's really interesting because from this varied information, you can do many things. There are many applications for that. And in particular, I focus in these videos, I focus on what we call landmark ecology. That means the study of the evolution of territories. Here you can see a famous sand dune in France, which is Dune du Pilat, and you can see over 50 years, you can see its evolution. You can see the erosion of the coast. And so, one important application with landmark ecology is, for example, to study prevention and management of environmental risk. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valerie. So next up, member in the Time Machine organization is Harry Verwayen. He's Executive Director at Europeana Foundation. He is responsible there for the overall strategy and the impact of Europeana as a platform for digital transformation of the cultural heritage sector in Europe. So this already exists and is available. And Europeana Foundation brings together all these collections that you're probably familiar with in one way or another. So Harry, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Claartje. Just very quickly, some history about Europeana and how that relates to Time Machine. So some of you may remember that in 2005, Google took an interest in cultural heritage. Very specifically, they developed the Google Library project, and the premise of that project was Google will come in with their machines, and they're going to digitize every single book that we have around in Europe and in the world, in fact. And I think that was received also by me as a very interesting project. Why not? Why not have Google scan and use their technology and making all of that available to the world? Now, you've already seen me in the video saying something about this, and I want to make very clear that it's not about not working with commercial companies. I think they're extremely valuable and important in the equation. But what became very important was and still is that cultural heritage is something that belongs to us, I think, to the public. And that was really the very premise of starting Europeana in 2008. It was a big political decision, all the way to the level of heads of state, Mitterrand, and went all the way to President Barroso at the time. And so that's how Europeana got started. And I think what it delivered is what will be hopefully a component of the Time Machine. So Europeana currently is an association of close to 4,000 museums, libraries and archives. We have close to 60 million objects now. I think the important thing that we can contribute is that we have developed standards. Standards that make all this material available, interoperable, open, and available to use in things like Time Machine. So if Claartje allows me, I'm going to make immediately the jump to the future.
Go for it.
Go for it? Yeah, because also in response to Gustavo's question, what is the futuristic approach to this? So I'm a historian, like you, Julia, and I've never been interested in science fiction. Never did anything for me. Far out stuff, couldn't relate to it. So I'm always looking at, what is the thing that I can relate to immediately? And for that, I have my little range of writers, and I'd like to cite you something that really blew my mind and that related very well to what you've heard from Frédéric about the Time Machine project. So I'm going to cite you something from the March article of Wired magazine. I think some of you will know that. From one of my favorite authors, Kevin Kelly, and it's called Mirror World. And I think it will help you to imagine how close Time Machine actually is to us. So here goes. And I quote, "The mirror world doesn't yet fully exist, but it is coming. Someday soon, likely in the next 10-15 years, every place and thing in the real world, every street, lamppost, building and room, will have its full-size digital twin in the mirror world. For now, only tiny patches of the mirror world are visible through artificial intelligence headsets. Piece by piece, these virtual fragments are being stitched together to form a shared, persistent place that will parallel the real world. Google Earth, mentioned before, has long offered a hint of what this mirror world will look like. It's already under construction. Deep in the research labs of tech companies around the world, scientists and engineers are racing to construct virtual places that overlay actual places." And here this becomes important. We've seen some examples also from the Amsterdam Time Machine, and as much as we like, it still looks a little bit clunky maybe to you, right? But crucially, these emerging digital landscapes will feel real. They'll exhibit what landscape architects call placeness. The street view images in Google Maps are just facades, flat images hinged together. But in the mirror world, a virtual building will have volume. A virtual chair will exhibit chairness, and a virtual street will have layers of textures, gaps and intrusions that all convey a sense of street. So it becomes real to us. At first, the mirror world will appear to us as a high-resolution stratum of information overlaying the real world. We might see a virtual name tag hovering in front of people we previously met. Perhaps a blue arrow showing us the right place to turn a corner. On this platform, all things and places will be machine readable, subject to the power of algorithms. Also, like its predecessors, the web, social media, this new platform will unleash prosperity of thousands more companies in its ecosystem. Skipping a few parts, and here it comes. Augmented reality is the technology underpinning the mirror world. It's the awkward newborn that will grow into a giant. Mirror worlds immerse you without removing you from the space. You are still present, but on a different plane of reality. And here is where the 4D element comes in. Time is a dimension in the mirror world that can be adjusted. Unlike the real world, but very much like the world of software apps, you will be able to scroll back. History will be a verb. With a swipe of your hand, you'll be able to go back in time at any location and see what came before. You'll be able to lay a reconstructed 19th century view right over present reality. So basically, all we've heard here before is not science fiction anymore. It will be happening in the next 10, 15 years. It will be a reality, just like Google Street Maps hit us, like a bomb 10, 15 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry, for this image. The textual evocation of what we've been imagining and talking about. For our third panel member, Bastien Varoutsikos, he's a cultural heritage specialist, an archaeologist, and director of development for Iconem, which is a French startup carrying out large-scale program of 3D digitization of heritage at risk. But this is again a very particular kind of heritage, perhaps, around the world, and an important partner in our time machine group.
I'll stand because I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Be able to see. All right. Good evening, everyone. Is that the mic close enough? Okay. So, cultural heritage gets destroyed all the time. Yes, sure. I mean, I don't. Oh, it's okay. Thank you. It gets destroyed all the time. Gets destroyed everywhere. It's iconoclasm. It's unchecked urban development. It is mass tourism. It is ecological change. And I mean, I showed a picture of the cliff of Bamiyan here. But it happened in Paris very recently. Actually happened in Paris with Notre Dame, it happened in Paris with Saint-Sulpice, with Versailles. I mean, you don't have to go very far to see that it's going to happen anyway. Now, what Iconem does is really sort of based on one of its very first mission, which was, that's why I showed Afghanistan, but which was on the site of Messainak. Now, the very basic philosophy is sort of embodied by this site. Messainak is this beautiful settlement. It's in Afghanistan. First Kushan settled there. Then it's one of the major Buddhist sites of Central Asia. It's also located on one of the biggest copper mine of the whole region. So the government, after many negotiations, ended up giving the rights of exploitation of the mine to a Chinese corporate mining group. And it was not so much a matter of if as much as a matter of when. We knew the site was going to get destroyed. Now, what do you do at this point when you know this is going to happen? You know you have anywhere between a month to a year, 2 years maybe, to collect as much data as possible. French archaeologists were already working there. Where Iconem sort of proposed one of the solutions, which was let's collect as much data as fast and as precisely as possible. And in order to do so, ended up recreating a 3D model of the entire site. So the idea here again is seeing a site as an ensemble of information. So when cultural heritage is destroyed, what is destroyed is several things. It is a data set. There's informations about structures, informations about volumes, the intersections of both, but it's also like a few other aspects. We're talking about the emotion, the behavior of communities towards this environment. We're also talking about a source of economic revenue for local populations. So that there's many different layers that are basically completely erased when the cultural heritage site is destroyed. Now, Iconem is trying to look at those aspects in a comprehensive way, but the very first point of entry for us remains the 3D model. So what we do is photogrammetry. We go to a place, take tens of thousands of pictures. This is an example of Murad Khani, which is the old city of Kabul. And then we basically recreate 3D models as sort of this raw material to then eventually create data that will be directly, and that will have direct application in cultural heritage preservation. This is some plans that have been extracted from, this is the Grand Serai of Murad Khani. This is, again, a view of the Saint-Romain, which is an abbey near Beaucaire in the south of France. And this is one of the examples that you've seen in the video, actually, which is in Palmyra. So here again, the idea is to manage to collect as much data as possible in an environment where we know the cultural heritage is going to be destroyed or has been destroyed, and we can collect as much as we can. Any little scrap of information we'll record, and then we'll reorganize later to be able to analyze it in many different ways. This is Jablet, this is in Syria as well. And then the idea is basically to create a new type of access. So some sites are not accessible because they're destroyed. Some sites are not accessible because they're in conscious war. But some sites are also not accessible because, well, there's just a limit in the number of tourists that can access it every day. So what we want to do also is sort of create this raw material that can enable access to archaeological sites. And we do that through various means, various collaboration, and I think Time Machine here is the main one. Exhibitions are also definitely a way to communicate some of our results. And this is an example of Notre Dame, and maybe you should have started with that. Also to show that there's an interest of ours, which is to integrate as much as possible, sort of create this connection between cultural heritage and the people around it. So this is a 3D model that's been actually built fairly quickly using mostly crowdsourced image. And the idea here again is to, through this 3D model, sort of bring people together around a particular site by creating an experience which sort of goes beyond the simple data set aspects of the archaeological sites, and again sort of find a way to sort of bring the cultural heritage back to its community. There's a, oh, that is you. Sorry, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bastien, also for evoking this idea of experiencing sites or worlds, perhaps, that have been lost in a way, but still exist in another way. And for the experiential part of the time machine, we have Deborah Papiernik in our panel in the room today. She works as she works for a game company called Ubisoft. She works in new business development. And Ubisoft, some of you may know it, is a French video game company and a major player in the international video games world. And they're breaking new grounds with all kinds of things beyond video games. Also, for instance, through these collaborations that we've been talking about today. So, Deborah, please tell us what you do.
Thank you. So Ubisoft is a major player, as you said, in the video games sector. We are the third largest developer and publisher of video games, and you probably know some of our brands, all the Tom Clancy series, Just Dance, Rayman, The Division, Splinter Cell, and our biggest brand is probably Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed is, oops, sorry, I knew this was a bad idea. Assassin's Creed is a time machine by itself. The principle is a battle between the Templars and the Assassins, and the hero actually travels in time in a sense that he has the DNA, in his DNA, he can go back in time and play the role of one of his ancestors. The first game we released was about the Third Crusade. We then explored the Italian Renaissance, then we explored the American Revolution, then the French Revolution, the Industrial Revolution in London, and then more recently Egypt and Greece. And when we work on those games, we do games. So the interest is for players to have fun and play. But we also go very deep in working on recreating history. When we do the Third Crusade, when we do the American Revolution, we talk to specialists. We read books, we go to libraries, we then talk to experts, like the American Revolution, for example, lots of experts about the different weapons. Or we went and talked to people who are recreating battles, people who are just fans, and they recreate with costumes, they recreate everything. We also do visits on site when we want to recreate Greece. We also go on site. We look at all the books and talk to all the experts, but we also go on site. And why do we do that? Because we want our games to be authentic. We want them to be authentic, to be credible, because it's much more fun for the players, but also because Ubisoft's mission is to enrich people's life through memorable moments. And you wouldn't expect that from a video games company, but it's actually true. People who play our games learn so much, and we have beautiful stories of families who go to Venice or to Florence with their kids, and then the kids are doing the tour for their parents because they know Florence much better. They learned it in the games. Or those little Korean kids, they know much more than the French kids about the French Revolution just because they played the game. They didn't sit in school just to wait for the class to be finished. So we have this beautiful thing, and if you, all over the world, when as Notre Dame was burning, we were very surprised to see players from all over the world posting videos from Assassin's Creed Unity. Assassin's Creed Unity was released in 2014, and it's set during the French Revolution. We recreated about 50 monuments in Paris, and the one that we paid most attention to was actually Notre Dame. It was about 18 months of work just on this single monument. If you want to maybe show the video. It's in the first image. You have to go at the bottom of the first image. So that's a recreation of Paris. And this is actually in-game, so that's what the player sees when he actually plays. And all this is handmade by graphists based on pictures and books and old images. So you control the character, you can actually climb on Notre Dame. Now we also take liberty because we're an entertainment company. So we're not bound by science. Our role is not to do something that's scientific. So for example, one of the liberties that we took here is the spire. During the French Revolution, there was no spire because the original spire from the 13th century had been taken down because it was about to break, and there was no spire, and the new spire was only done in the second half of the 19th century. So there was no spire. But when we decided to represent Notre Dame in our game, we decided to do the spire just because it's so aspirational. Just like the player, we knew the player it was so iconic that we knew the players wanted to climb on the spire. and the players actually recognized it. And what they posted most was actually climbing on the spire while Notre Dame was burning. So well, maybe I'll stop here and we'll have more later.
This is wonderful. Thank you, Deborah. Wonderful and so hopeful to have these images after we've all seen the burning Notre Dame, of course. I have all kinds of questions, but I propose that I will just ask them in person one day, and we will go to the audience to hear what you are thinking, the questions that you have for either of the four speakers here. If I can ask you also to keep your questions and the answers brief, so that we can maybe touch on a few more topics. That'd be great. Thank you. Oh. Yes. Okay. So questions. Who would like to start off? In the back. I will come to you.
Good evening. My question is in particular for the lady from Ubisoft, but I think this also expands to the rest of the panel. Starting out, you said on the one hand we're trying to recreate Paris and the rest of the games as authentic as possible, while at the same time saying we as an entertainment company can take liberties, we're not tied to scientific conditions. However, you do influence, and this is the part that stretches to the rest of the panel. What you present is what the public learns from, sees. So every single decision that you make influences their historical perspective or their knowledge. Is there a way to keep that in mind when you're developing your technologies?
Yes, definitely. What we did, for example, for Assassin's Creed Origins set in Egypt during the time of Ptolemy, in addition to the actual game, we had so many requests from teachers who wanted to use our games in school that the team decided to create a version that's an educational version. So in this version, we took the world of Assassin's Creed Origins, with the pyramids, with Alexandria, with scenes of daily life. And maybe I have also a video that you might want to launch. We took the game, we took off all the combat, all the storytelling, all the pressure of time that you're going to have in a video game, and we just have this beautiful world, and we created tours. So it's 45 tours. It's a total of 7 hours of content, of an interactive encyclopedia, where you actually just walk in the game. You use a pad just as if you were a gamer. You walk there, and we added educational content on top of what we had already recreated. Images from the Louvre, for example, to illustrate more deeply. I have a video here where you can see the mummification process, for example. If you're going to use a book, you're going to read about the mummification process, and maybe you're going to remember some of it. If you actually see a mummification process and you see people doing it, you're going to learn much more. And this is what we're doing with this game. So we're separating here, going one step further in the educational content, and we also explain the liberties that we took, for example, in terms of map. When we do a map, the gamer has to be able to go from one place to the other, and he has to be able to go there rather quickly, because otherwise it's boring. He also has to be able to see the points of interest. So we often make things closer than they are in reality. And all this is explained, for example, in the discovery mode of Assassin's Creed.
So unfortunately, it looks like we couldn't find the video. Is there a way for the audience to see it?
If you just go to type discovery mode Assassin's Creed or discovery tour Assassin's Creed, and you'll find plenty of videos with the content. The fans love these games. The fans are so passionate about Assassin's Creed that you can have the entire content of 12 years of Assassin's Creed just on YouTube.
Thank you. Yes.
Just a quick word. I think it might be a bit postmodernist to me, but I think we need to have several modes of representation of the data. I mean, we've talked about that today during the time machine meetings. How do we process the information? How do we deliver it? There are choices that have to be made every time at all steps. And we need also those different modes of representation. I mean, the importance is sort of to acknowledge it, to be also very straightforward about it.
Actually, we also worked together, Ubisoft and Iconem, we worked together on an exhibition that was at the Arab World Institute in Paris. So you saw a few images earlier, but it was composed mainly of giant projections based on the work of Iconem. So based on their photogrammetry, you can then do videos and choose whatever you want. It's like a 3D world. So you choose the path that you want and you represent these beautiful videos, very impressive. And it was a virtual journey from Palmyra to Mosul. So you had Palmyra, Mosul, Aleppo, and Leptis Magna in Libya. So not really places you want to go on vacation. But the aim of the exhibition was to raise awareness as of the state involved in protecting our cultural heritage. And at the end of the exhibition, Ubisoft created an immersion in virtual reality. We took 6 models, 6 different sites from the models from Iconem, and we put that into a video games engine, so it was a different treatment, video games engine into a virtual reality headset. And we added life back into the scenes, because photogrammetry by nature is going to create a 3D model that has no life, no movement.
So I think we should keep it at that to allow for a few more questions. But you hear the passion and the many interesting examples. Thank you. Another question here. Yeah, I will come to you after. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentations. Actually, my questions are also for the panel before, but maybe you have some response as well. One question is about the voids, and it sort of relates to the earlier question, that voids are maybe as interesting as the things that we do know. So how do you think about visualizing the data that we don't have? Are there interesting ways in which we can also make more apparent where the voids are in our knowledge by making that more visual? And the second question is maybe more of a kind of, provocative suggestion. Should it not be a 5D model? Because we all know that history and heritage is a matter of interpretation. So could we not have a model that also incorporates different interpretations of the data, so that we could have, as it were, as many versions as we want actually of those reconstructions, depending on how researchers interpret the data?
Thank you. Big questions.
I can go quickly. Yes, the answer. The short one. In many cases, unfortunately, we do have to. Well, I'm just talking here about the 3D model, which is just a portion of what Time Machine is as a whole. But I think what is interesting within Time Machine is how each approach, digitization of archives, the 3D model, are just going to complement each other and sort of bring new layers of understanding. Now, so in the case of 3D model themselves, to be short, we basically work with archaeologists, work with architects to be able to reconstruct. And at some point, you have to make decisions in terms of interpretation to just display what isn't here anymore. Now, there's also almost a political choice sometimes that you have to make. The images have an impact. So that's another discussion, but it's also something that we have to consider when we work on it. We also work on ways to visually represent different types of restoration processes, for instance, different steps at least. We have ways to integrate archives in the models. We run into very interesting examples sometimes where we realize that when we compare what the archive says about a building before it's moved into a museum and the 3D model of the building inside the museum that we reconstructed, it turns out that some of the museum decided to take out a few stones just to make it fit. There's so it's for us a sort of a constant back and forth between a whole different formats and natures of information to be able to get a picture as
if I may be very strict, I think this is.
I was done. Thank you.
I think this represents the broader Time Machine stance, and it's a point of discussions in these days in the meetings that we're currently having, definitely. So thank you.
Maybe I can add something.
If you're very, very brief.
It will be short.
Because
it's
it's
the
already
part
time.
of your question. Of course, the space and time are the 4D dimension. It's the core dimensions. But of course, on top of that, you can build many other kind of dimensions. It will be the description will be multidimensional or multi-attributes. So after that, you will have a big data, a set of big data that you will be able to browse by considering 10 or 20 or 100 different dimensions. For example, if you want to find all the churches in Europe that correspond to a Gothic style between a given period. So you will have many criteria to browse the data.
Thank you. And apologies to the people who raised their hands and will not be allowed to ask their questions because it's already 9:30 and we have to be strict on time. But thank you for your intention, and hopefully you can, talk to someone right after the meeting. So many thanks to this panel. Maybe we should give them some more applause for their contributions. So I think what I take from this is that we need more time together. So this will not be the last of these meetings, and if you're interested, please do get in touch in various ways, contact us, and we'll involve you in the conversation. It will be valuable to the project as well. And before I really close the session, I would like to ask Emily if you could present the speaking authors with the small token of our appreciation that we got from you. It's a very analog gift, which I'm sure you as heritage and history people will also get to enjoy. So thank you very much for all the people who came and listened and asked questions tonight. It's been really wonderful to have such a full house, and we hope to see you again soon. And thank you very much for Emily also for setting this up, and the SPUI25 people. Thank you.
Thank you, Claartje.
Sorry, I talked too much. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
I researched
Don't worry, it's really not a problem. If it was a specific video that they couldn't find, it would be a problem. But here, it's so easy for them. They just go discover your tour, they will find 7 hours of content. Don't worry, it's really not a problem. Yeah, actually, we wanted to license it, but it's very complex, so we're kind of like... Yeah, for the moment, yes, because we have a hard time selling it. But it costs a lot to do it. Just the work of extracting, like modifying your game,
not only see like the spatial and time, but also all these extra layers of the reality.
In compensation for that, I mean, what we're getting in terms PR, of pride for our own employees who now understand our mission. Like when they created the mission like